Before she was a case, before she was a headline, before her name became something people searched for, Amy Bradley was a person. She had routines, she had preferences, she had a way of laughing that people remembered, a personality that was like a magnet. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, and someone's friend. And before anything went wrong, she was known and she was loved. This first episode of our Amy Bradley series is not about what happened to Amy. It isn't about theories, timelines, or unanswered questions. This episode is about who she was before anyone was looking for her. Because when we talk about missing people, it's too easy to begin at the moment that they disappear. But every life starts somewhere else. And if we don't take the time to understand who Amy was, how she lived, what mattered to her, how she moved through this world, then everything that follows risks becoming abstract. So before we talk about a ship or a morning or a case file, we're going to do something simpler. We're going to talk about Amy. This episode is about the life she lived, not the mystery she left behind. This is the Midnight Mystery Archive and part one of our Amy Bradley series. It is thought that every person's life begins on the day that they're born. And in a sense, that is true. In another sense, it actually begins much earlier than that. When Iva Bradley was 13, she had a crush on an older boy named Ron and gave him a love letter. As she tells it, he was the first and only boy she'd ever had a crush on. One day outside of school, Ron, carrying his basketball bag, bumped into Iva, and that crush and that interaction is truly the beginning of Amy's story.
With our relationship, we met when we were, I was barely 13 and Ronnie was almost 15. So this was a culmination of falling in love and being separated over some time because I went to Baton Rouge and then I went overseas and then coming back together and getting married with 18 and 19 and then waiting a little while. I was 21 when Amy was born and Ronnie was 23. But I saw him when I was 13 and a half years old on the steps at junior high. And I took one look at him at 13 and a half. And in fact, I've got a picture where I wrote him a little love note on the back of it. And he walked past me and bumped me with his basketball bag and said, Iva, Iva, Iva. Now, you got to know that back then that was bold. And so from that moment forward, so there is also love at first sight.
When Amy did finally arrive, the world for Ron and Iva began to transform. They were now a family, and their little girl became the centerpiece.
Well, I can tell you that she was born at 3:14 p.m. on Mother's Day. So that was such a huge thing to us, that we had a baby girl, and that's when she was born. And
Yeah, you're right. And when she was born, all we were concerned with was that she was healthy. She had all her limbs and, that type of thing, and just brought her home. And I always had high hopes for her, when she was coming up. I was very active in sports, and it seemed like that she go right in line with that. So yeah, she's special for sure.
As any parent would tell you, there is no greater joy in this world than watching your children grow and develop. From the first steps to the first words, it is a joy that is hard to match in life. And that story was no different for Ron and Iva Bradley. 2 years after Amy was born, their family circle was completed when their son, Ron Jr., more affectionately known as Brad, was born. And as Iva recalls, Amy was the best big sister who bonded with her baby brother immediately. So much so that Brad kind of played the role of Amy's baby.
And I've got pictures of, you might have seen them on the Facebook pages of her holding him when he was a week old. I mean, that was her baby.
The Bradley house wasn't quiet, it wasn't formal. It was the kind of place people gravitated toward. We all know these houses. The one house in the neighborhood where all the kids can go and hang out, have fun, know they're safe. That was the Bradley's house. It was not because of anything particular. It was just because the atmosphere the family created together was so special.
Our dynamic as a family growing up, and not only Amy and I's relationship with each other, but our parents. I mean, we just had always had a wonderful relationship. There was never any punishments. There were never any groundings. Um, there was none of that, and it was just a beautiful, story of how life I think is supposed to be. For everybody, and again, and
There was always a crowd at the house, and that's something that's really great about Amy and Brad both. Is if you wanted to find out where everybody's kid was in the neighborhood, they were at our house. It was just a great place. I guess we had a lot of fun.
That sense of openness mattered. It shaped how both kids moved through the world. And for Amy in particular, the neighborhood itself became an extension of home.
we didn't have too huge a gap. And in a lot of time, our neighborhood that we grew up in, there was a ton of young families with a lot of kids. And, back in the day where, before cell phones and internet, we were on our bikes. We were down at the creek. We were at the rope swing. We were fishing. We were hanging out at the pool. And we just had an amazing group of friends, and all the kids that grew up in the neighborhood together. I still communicate with a lot of them. A lot of my, obviously most of my best friends were kids that grew up in the neighborhood with me. So
The bond between siblings only grew as Amy and Brad grew older. The foundational piece that kept them close really was their love of athletics. It started early when Amy became involved in the local swim team. As Iva recalls, they were dedicated to their swimming, and Amy began to show hints of the leadership skills that would be central to her entire athletic career.
And then she went from swimming on a swim team to actually coaching a neighborhood swim team. And then she was also, when she was at Longwood, she assisted with the swim team there.
spent some time. I can't tell you how many hours each day during the summer months we'd spend at the pool together, and then the swim team, and going to practices together, and doing all the meets together. And after the meets, we'd all go to the pizza parlor together, and the whole team. And
When your children move beyond the stage of stuffed animals and elementary school habits, the first hints of how they might develop into adults begins to take shape. It's when the earliest signs of what makes our kids tick begin to show up. For some, it might be the arts. For others, it's math or science. For Amy, it was one thing: athletics. Amy continued to swim and excel in the pool, but she also began to spread her wings and take on additional athletic endeavors. If you are at all familiar with Amy's story, her athletic prowess and her competitive nature is well known. Amy lettered in 5 sports, a remarkable accomplishment, but there can be little doubt that her greatest athletic love was the basketball court. Amy wasn't just a skilled player on the court. She wasn't just a part of the puzzle. She was central to her success and her team's success. From an early age, she was a genuine and valuable teammate, often taking the time necessary to help other teammates grow and develop their skills, not in a condescending way, but in an encouraging way that helped bring out the best in each and every player. While Amy was known as a great player and teammate, what truly stood out about her was her competitive spirit. She was tenacious in her competitive spirit. She always put in the time and work to ensure her game was as sharp as it could be and positioned her teams to win.
basketball was one of the other big ones. Obviously, when I later got big enough and strong enough, and I could jump higher and all that, I could actually, compete a little bit. But just shooting, we had a goal in the driveway. Countless hours spent out there playing horse and one-on-one. And
Well, I think that she went from one sport to the next sport to the next sport. That was her love.
That was.
That's what kept the juices flowing. I mean, We're talking an extremely competitive situation, all of us, about the fact that until Brad got some height on him, she would just wear him out. And then, of course, when he got, taller and he was able to.
And then she'd quit on it. She said, I'm not going to take that punishment. I'm not going to eat it.
That competitiveness wasn't confined to the court. It showed up in how Amy approached almost everything. It wasn't about winning for its own sake. It was about effort, about not leaving anything on the court. But athletics was only one dimension of who Amy was becoming. As she moved through her teenage years, another picture began to emerge, one that people who knew her best describe just as vividly as any highlight from a basketball court. Amy was a natural connector, not in the performative surface level way that adolescence sometimes produces, but in a way that felt earned and real. She remembered things about people. She showed up. She was the kind of friend who made the people around her feel seen, not because it was strategic, but because it was simply who she was. Amy's friend Stacy remembers that quality clearly.
She didn't care what anybody thought. Like if she would see, we would be up in there. And Caddy's was an older joint at the time. Even then, it was a kind of an older joint. A lot of older people and stuff. You know, in between breaks and stuff, people they do a dance mix. In between doing karaoke songs, and people get up and dance. Well, Amy would get up and pull up, like, especially if they had a veteran hat on or something. She would go over there and pull that guy up and dance with them. But she had a lot of people who she'd be sitting there that she had danced with in the past that'd come up and get her to dance. She loved for people to have fun in that moment or feel good about themselves. Amy was confident. She was not cocky. She was confident, and she was not a bragger. I didn't know Amy. You know how I found out how Amy was so good at basketball? It was her dad when I met him. He's the one who told me about how good she was. Amy didn't tell me all that.
What the people who knew Amy in those years consistently describe is a young woman who understood how to be present, not distracted, not performing, but present. She had an energy that was hard to define, but easy to feel. People gravitated toward her, not just because she was talented, but because being around her felt like something.
Outspoken, very confident, around people. She, that phrase, she never met a stranger. She was always very comfortable, kind of being the center of attention, I guess I would say. So she didn't shy away as she got older. I think as she got through, her junior, senior year of high school, where things really, really went well for her, and she had a lot of interest from a lot of different schools to come play. And then obviously chose Longwood so as to be, close to home, so she could come back and see her family and her friends and not be so far away. But yeah, she just kind of developed a higher level of self-confidence, I think.
Every person who matters has edges, things that bother them, preferences that are not negotiable. Amy was no different, and those details, the small specific things that irritated her or made her laugh, are part of what makes her a full person rather than just a symbol and a part of a story.
We were talking about this the other day. She didn't like to be held down or restrained. And it wasn't like, this was a common theme is how we figured this out. But my dad learned quickly one day where he went up behind her. And this was when, I don't know, she might have been 16 or 18 or 19 or something. But he grabbed her from behind and was like, what are you going to do? Like, you can't do anything. What are you going to do? She was like, Dad, let me go. He was like, no, like, what are you going to do? She's like, Dad, let me go. And he was being playful and didn't. So she headbutted him with the back of her head right in the mouth and nose. And they both went, because he still had a hold of her, into the couch, fell on the couch, broke the legs off the couch. The couch flipped over backwards. And that was the last time that anyone ever held Amy around, bear hugged her so she couldn't move. So that was one thing that I didn't realize, obviously, until that happened. But she obviously had a big problem with that.
She was grown up. She was figuring herself out. and the people around her were watching someone become exactly who she was meant to be and who they always hoped she would be. Once a child graduates high school, it's their first opportunity to put the adult skills they've been building to the test. But more than that, it's also when they fully begin to understand who they are, what inspires them, and where they want to go in life. For Amy Bradley, that transition into adulthood didn't signal a break from the person she'd been, it deepened her. The traits her family had watched develop through childhood and adolescence didn't disappear when she left home. If anything, they became more distinct. The competitiveness that had defined her on the court translated into how she approached her life. The warmth she'd shown as a teammate translated into how she moved through her relationships. She wasn't reinventing herself, she was becoming more fully herself. Amy's independence wasn't just about career or lifestyle, it extended to how she understood herself.
Came out with her sexuality in 1995. That was when I was 17, 18, and she would have been in about 19, 20. So I think she got to the point where she felt comfortable enough with who she was to you know to own it, and kind of be public about it, whereas previously obviously she may not have been.
This wasn't a rupture, it was continuity. Amy was building a life that reflected who she already was. What stands out when you talk to the people who knew Amy as an adult is how deliberately she maintained her family ties. It would be easy and common for a young adult to create natural distance, to call less, to visit when it was convenient, to let the relationship become more transactional over time. But that was not Amy. The relationship between Amy and her brother Brad is its own chapter within this story. The bond that started when Brad arrived as a baby, the bond Iva describes as Amy treating Brad like her own, had deepened over the years into something that functioned more like a partnership than a typical sibling dynamic.
We've talked a lot about my personal relationship and Amy and I's friendship. Extremely close, a lot of love. There wasn't any crap. There wasn't any, contention. There wasn't any, underlying animosity. None of it. So I'd love for people to understand and actually believe, what actually was the case, that we were extremely close and loved each other very much.
They pushed each other. They were competitive with each other in the way that only siblings who genuinely respect and love each other can be. And they showed up for each other in ways that the people around them noticed. There's also a quality to Amy's adult relationships that people who knew her return to again and again. A quality that's harder to name than athleticism or humor, but that may be more important than either. She was compassionate, not in a passive way, not in the way that means someone is simply polite or avoids conflict. She was actively, practically compassionate, the kind of person who noticed when something was wrong before you said it out loud.
I think one thing about Amy that's really important is she's a very compassionate individual. She has special feelings for, let's say, um,
Handicapped people, and she in high school she taught, as part of her teaching certificate, she taught or worked with the mentally challenged
and
kids at school.
and actually, we're real proud to also say she was the only student that was going, and this is high school, this isn't college, that they brought her over into the section of the school where the challenged kids were, and she just adapted to that. It was kind of like she watched out and was very serious and very determined to give her time to help people.
One good story about Amy is we were at a place called Fox and Hound. There was some karaoke going on, I think, and people get to drinking and all. And there was a guy in a wheelchair, a Vietnam veteran, it was there, and you could see on his arm he had an American flag tattoo, and it had like slice marks through it. And he said that they sliced that American flag when he was over there when he was a prisoner. And so Amy was over there talking to him and carrying on conversations, and then took him out on the dance floor with his wheelchair and was dancing with him out there. So that shows you what kind of compassion she has.
And Amy and animals, that's another whole dynamic. Watch out for tending to making sure.
Well, it's like one day we had a creek behind our house, and all the kids used to go down there and play, and there was a kind of a flood, and the creek got really high and pretty swift. And I guess it was about 15 foot across. And we took our Jack Russell Terrier down there, and he slipped and fell in the water and was going down the creek, and had flipped over upside down. So he didn't have long. Amy jumps in the creek, goes down, rescues him,
Not knowing what's the
moves him out. I said she could have jumped on anything, but she just went in and got him and basically saved him from going down the creek.
Those qualities, the connection, the loyalty, the attentiveness, didn't exist in isolation. They were a part of a young woman who had built a real life with real relationships in the years before 1998, a life that mattered to the people living alongside it. Amy wasn't pausing her life. She was building it, making plans, taking on new things, the kind of ordinary momentum that only matters in hindsight, but that tells you everything about the kind of person she was. There is a particular kind of pride that parents carry when they watch a child become an adult. Not a successful adult necessarily, not in the measurable resume sense, but a good one. Somebody who has taken what they were given and built something decent and real with it. That is how Ron and Iva describe Amy. Not as a case, not as a headline, not as a photograph on a flyer. What Ron wants people to know about Amy isn't complicated. It doesn't require a long explanation or a careful caveat. It's something simpler than that and more durable. He wants people to know her, and he wants people to know who she was. Not the case, not the timeline, not the questions that still don't have answers. Amy, the person she was before any of this began. Brad's perspective carries its own weight because Brad didn't just love Amy the way siblings love each other. He knew her in the way that only someone who grew up beside you, competed against you, and watched you every day can know someone. What he describes is a sister who was fully present in his life, not occasionally, not when it was convenient, consistently, intentionally present. That's not a small thing. And it isn't an accident. It reflects something in Amy's character that runs through every account of her, from Iva's early memories to the people who spent time with her in the years before 1998. She showed up. 28 years is a long time to hold something, to carry a question that doesn't resolve, to wake up and face a world that has largely moved on while the absence remains exactly as present as it was the morning it began. Ron and Iva have done that. Brad has done that. They have done it with the kind of dignity that doesn't announce itself, that simply continues quietly year after year because the alternative is to let go of someone who deserved better than that.
After 28 years, unfortunately for me, I have these flashes of memories and times and people we hung out with and things we did. But the memories of our experiences together, tend to get a little bit lost, I think. And it's hard to recall and tell stories about, specific things. It's a weird thing. And I've found myself on different interviews when people, ask me to, tell them a funny story and it's like my brain it's like it gets locked up.
So I can tell you that our love for each other, our love for our children. Hey, look, I know that they're 51 and 49, but I was my mama's baby when I was 62. That's how we get up every morning. And I swear to you, we have a kiss that we have every night before we go to bed, and it's for Amy. And in the morning, we say maybe today. And then at night, we say, well, maybe tomorrow. Because she's worth it. I'm telling you what.
By the end of this episode, there are still things we haven't talked about. We haven't talked about a ship. We haven't talked about a timeline, what went wrong. And that's intentional because before Amy became a case, she was a person with a life already in motion. She was known to the people around her, not as a headline, not as a photograph, not as a question, but as a real loved person, someone who showed up in ordinary ways, someone who mattered in practical, everyday moments. And that matters. It matters because every investigation, theory, or unanswered question belongs to someone. It belongs to a daughter, a sister, a friend. This is who the case belongs to. In the episodes that follow, we will continue to move carefully into the events that came next. We'll talk about the morning everything stopped. We'll talk about what is known and what isn't. And we'll talk about how time, structure, and systems shaped what happened afterward. But this episode stands on its own. It's here to remind us that before Amy was missing, she was living and she was happy and loved, and that her life deserved to be understood on its own terms. Before we close, there are a few important places we want to direct you. First, if you want to support the family's ongoing efforts, you can learn more at amybradleyismissing.com. That site contains information, updates, and resources directly connected to Amy's case. You can also sign up for the Amy Alert. It's a family and supporter-led initiative focused on keeping Amy's story visible and encouraging responsible awareness and protecting people on cruise ships. Second, if you're listening to this series, you likely understand how important personal safety and preparedness can be. We've partnered with Invisaware, a company that creates discreet personal safety devices designated to help people call for help quickly if they need it. During this series, any orders placed with Invisaware using my affiliate link, invisaware.com/midnight mystery archive, will receive 10% off. In addition to that, all of those proceeds will be donated to the Bradley family's GoFundMe, which helps to provide resources for private investigators to search and hopefully find Amy. And finally, for those of you who write, research, or organize complex stories, we're also partnered with Scrivener, a writing and research tool many journalists and long-form storytellers use to manage their work. The link is in the episode description. And as always, supporting our partners helps support this podcast, but your attention to Amy's story is what matters most. Let everybody know that we're doing this series. Let them know that we're telling Amy's story so that we can bring new listeners to the show and do justice to Amy's story. You find all of the links I just mentioned in the show notes. Coming up next week, episode 2 of our Amy Bradley series. I appreciate you listening. Until next time.